Well, viewers, war is chaos. It destroys lives, shatters hope. But not every tragedy is genocide. At least that's what some are saying in Gaza, that Israel is not committing genocide. That's what one of the world's foremost war experts, John Spencer, is saying, who's been on the front lines with the Israeli military. He breaks down the facts, the orders, and the reality on the ground. He joins me to talk more about what really is happening in Gaza and his claim, John Spencer's big claim, that there is no genocide happening in Gaza. Mr. Spencer, thanks so much for speaking to me on NDTV. Let me start by asking you the two primary arguments that you've made, which is the reason why you feel that there is no genocide happening in Gaza. Walk us through that, the reason why you feel that what's happening is regular warfare in Gaza and not genocide.
Sure. There's only two main points of the arguments, which are the two kind of attacking the counter argument that in order to have genocide, which is the highest of three, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and then genocide is the highest bar of human evilness, right? So the intent and actions to eliminate an entire group, race, religion, ethnicity. I argue I argue that the statements that have been cited by Israel political leaders, so the prime minister, the minister of defense, and the chief of staff about how they are going to destroy Hamas, or that Hamas is human animals. These in no way infer genocidal intent, which is the first bar you have to get over. Then you can get to actions. But genocidal intent usually requires, orders, direct statements, and each one of the comments that have been cited are just taken out of context. Of course, you want to destroy your enemy. I mean, they even use Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments about remember Amalek, which is a biblical verse that is posted not only on Israel's Holocaust Memorial national site, it's posted on the Holocaust Memorial in The Hague, those few words, which means remember the threats that are going to try to attack you. It isn't a call for genocide against a group. The only other argument one is that all these five political statements are not clear evidence of genocidal intent. And as a matter of fact, there are way more comments directly addressing the fact that all of these same individuals, the prime minister, the minister of defense, the chief of staff of Israel's army, have said, our fight is not with the people of Gaza. Just many statements. Of course, that is not factored into these people's arguments who say that there is genocidal intent. They don't factor in all of these direct statements.
What about the death toll that stands right now in Gaza? It's running upwards of 50,000. The world is worried. Every global agency, global stakeholder is worried that the death toll is only climbing in Gaza.
That's right. So, I mean, people can read the Genocide Convention themselves. It's only a few pages. And nowhere in it does it say, well, once you've hit this number of buildings destroyed, this many civilians unfortunately killed, then it's a genocide. That's not the way war works. It's definitely not the way the Genocide Convention works. And the numbers that are cited are very problematic, especially in this war where Hamas does not wear uniforms, does want civilians killed. Even if I'm having this argument, people will say, well, 17,000 children killed. Even that, although unfortunate, any child that gets killed, 17,000 children, that statistic is from Hamas. It includes everybody 18 and below, and Hamas regularly deploys child soldiers. And, there's problems with this list, natural deaths, all of this. The strong argument, you're right. If this was the way that genocidal intent was determined, the number of people killed in a war, almost every war could be classified as a genocide. And none of these things is that the way this works. Genocidal intent is determined by the words and the actions of the commanders. And this is, again, resting on my primary research, going into Gaza with the IDF and observing their actions. There is no genocidal intent. And there's actually mountains of evidence opposite of trying to eliminate civilians.
Okay.
mountains of evidence on what the IDF does to separate Hamas from the civilians, on
Okay.
warnings that they give.
Okay, but this is very contrary to what everyone is saying. The reason why I'm asking you this is you say that there is mountains of evidence saying that Israel is trying everything possible to ensure that there are no civilian casualties. But the world over, the biggest concern right now is that there is genocide happening in Gaza. Is that there are large number of civilian casualties taking place there.
Well, I'd clarify that, especially not the United States government in any way. The administration, our representatives, in the United Nations have ever made the claim that there's a genocide in Gaza because they actually have been on the ground with the political leaders, hosted the political leaders. Yes, within the United Nations, there are groups that say this. These same groups have a history of saying such things about other wars, the war against ISIS, they might not call it genocides, but they call them war crimes. Even the American forces in Iraq, these same groups classified as war crimes. I can't speak for each individual organization. Some of them are just straight anti-war. And this is why I'm so one, this is an assault on critical thinking that these few statements and these effects-based numbers are like the aggregated numbers of a war would equal genocide. So this is an assault on critical thinking. It's an assault on the rule of law. I mean, the laws of war are meant to put bounds on the brutality limit. It isn't meant to make war illegal, which is really what these individuals, groups, political leaders are trying to say without understanding any of the context of the war. So I can't speak for all of them, but of course there's awful things happening in Gaza. There's tragedy. There's awful amount of civilian deaths. But that isn't because of what Israel is doing. It's because of the tactics that Hamas deploys, the actual what Egypt has done to keep civilians in the combat zone to create this very unique war scenario. So each one of those groups, they can have their own opinions, but they can't have their own facts.
Okay. Does that mean that everything that is happening in Gaza, the death, destruction, devastation, all of it is because of Hamas? And some would say you're actually giving a complete clean sheet to Israel and to Prime Minister Netanyahu.
No, so there's definitely the main. Of course, there's death and destruction in war, right? I try to give people the context of the war, what Hamas built in Gaza, what the strategies that Hamas uses, the fact that all of the killing would stop if Hamas would give the hostages back and surrender, or the fact that all of the human suffering would have been alleviated had Egypt, to this day still could, open up their gate and allow for a very relatively in numbers small humanitarian area just on the other side of the gate outside of the grasp of Hamas, who wants all of this conversation to be happening, wants the numbers to be as high as they can be. Every individual action has to be assessed like the law of war requires. So yes, if there's a bombing and civilians are excessive to the goal, then that has to be questioned. But to aggregate it all and say, this is all Israel's fault, which is the narrative here is that there's a sneaky Israeli objective here that, of course, they can't do genocide in the open, so they're doing it very sneakily. That's just, again, an assault on my critical thinking skills and to those who have actually been there and seen the efforts the IDF are taking. Of course, there's lots of death. There's lots of destruction. Does that mean that Israel is intentionally doing that? Absolutely not.
Okay, you mentioned there's a lot of death, destruction, not because of Israel. But as a war scholar, is there something that you would have done differently in this war? After all, it's been going on since October 2023. Anything that you think, as a scholar, that stands out that you would have done differently?
Absolutely. I would have done a lot differently. Although some of the things that or let's say if you planned a U.S. military or any other large military operation under the similar context, Israel couldn't do, right? Because Israel is under a seven-front war. So it's just the number of manpower that you would have to deploy into the area. But the number one thing, and actually having interviewed senior Israeli officials, when all the delegations come there, the question that they weren't asking is, why can't we move the civilians out of the combat areas? Like every urban battle, every war I've ever studied, there's never been a single country who is forcing the suffering. And so step one would have been all diplomatic pressure, all global diplomatic pressure would have been put on Egypt to create a displaced persons camp, not in Egypt, not forced transfer, nothing. The thing that's happened in all wars. So that would have been step one. I would have also used more combat power to try to end the war quickly, because this is the protracted suffering that is being caused on the Gazan people have been when the path of destruction is laid in a road of good intentions, saying, well, you can't go there, you can't do this. All of these things have allowed Hamas to believe that they can win the war and try to protract it. Absolutely, there are things that Israel could have done vastly different had it had the capability or the resources. And this whole effort, genocide is just the first one, but there's been other ones about you can't use these tools. You can't. In the beginning, they said you can't move people out of their homes, which is insanity in war to say that you can't move the civilians out of harm's way so that the actual combatant in the military can be targeted. There's so many elements absolutely that would have been done differently, but and that's the question that has to be asked. Is like, why for Israel couldn't these things been done to end this war more quickly?
Okay. So what you're saying is that some of these things could have actually happened differently, but the fact that it was Israel, it was anyways disadvantaged for many factors. But many would believe, Professor Spencer, that you're actually just taking Israel's side in a war which does have an other side as well.
I mean, that's again an assault on just critical thinking. I do objective analysis around the world, so this isn't the first war I've covered. I've gone now to Israel 5 times, not to listen to what they say or what they want to show me, to do my own research in the confines of safety. One, Hamas is an evil, in my definition, terrorist organization who says, so this is the intent, genocidal intent, that they want to kill all the Jewish people in Israel. They want to have their own civilian population be killed. That's their statements, not mine. So I do collect as much as I can from their statements and their actions. But I understand when people think, well, you're just puppeting what Israel says. And that's not the way I do my research, of course. And again, going back to, people can have all the opinions they want, but if they're getting their information from what Hamas tells them, just like the casualty numbers, like people don't even look at the information that Hamas gives on the casualty numbers, like who is saying who is a Hamas combatant and who is a civilian that wasn't partaking in the hostilities. Well, we got to trust Hamas, as they're the only ones that can give us that information. That's not right either.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. Professor Spencer, thanks so much for speaking to me on NDTV on your big claim that you've made, which is that there's been no genocide in Gaza. Professor Spencer, viewers, is backing Israel, saying Israel has taken every step possible to minimize civilian deaths. And he goes on to say that if one only goes by casualty numbers, then every war in the world could actually be classified as genocide. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks so much, viewers, for tuning in to this very special conversation with John Spencer, who made that big explosive claim that there is no genocide that's taking place in Gaza.